I think Greg mentioned that I'm involved in this institute that we created, Centro Internacional Miranda, which has took about 2 years to really get off the ground, but is now, seems to be functioning, quite well. And we have a number of international scholars and, people working with us and different programs. And I mention that because one of the programs is, or two programs actually, are of SIM, Centro Internacional Miranda, are organized by my partner, Marta Harnecker. And one of them is the program on community participation, which is focused on, bringing people, studying participatory budgeting, studying the process of communal planning, the communal councils, and she was very much involved in the original process of bringing those communal councils, the characteristics of those, and also increasingly the question of discussions of what are called the socialist city. What would be a socialist city? But the other program that she's also involved in is the program on the political instrument, or the question of the party. And one of the programs that she will put on, or events that she's organized, will be a discussion of the theoretical work of Minero. What's his first name? Minero of the Calciere? Alfredo Minero, who was the thinker behind the organization Calciere, which was kind of a new left breakaway from the Communist Party in the 80s, I think it was. And he was a very influential thinker. The reason I mention him immediately is that we tried to find out the answer to the question you asked. Where did these thoughts come from? And Marta asked Aristobolo, who was the former Minister of Education, who came from the PPT, which was a part of the old Calciere organization. He had been the mayor of Caracas in the early 90s, and he said it's all Monero. So that seems to be an interesting source of these kinds of things. I can't pin it down. Now, Marta's put together a collection of his writings, which is going to be published shortly, and is organizing a panel of bringing together people on this. He was also very influential on Chavez. So that may be the source, but I can't give you the matching quote from him and from the passages in the Constitution. But certainly that seems to be an important element. There's no question in that Constitution, what the process of the constitutional formation of the Constitution was it emerged out of active social movements. It wasn't a case where if you had a constituent assembly here, without social movements, it would be a disaster. It was after a decade of struggle, of different social movements that you had, this, constituent assembly where, very well represented were indigenous, groups, and also the women's movement. And that is very clearly reflected in the Constitution that they produced. The Constitution produced has excellent material things on indigenous struggles, the honoring of their languages, their traditional land claims, etc. And it also is unique in having, as part of its central core, is pensions for women, people who work within the household. That is in the Constitution. Now, one of the problems, and let me just say that the women's movement is very strong there. There's an Institute of Women which has a very strong leadership, and one of the key leaders as well is an economist by the name of Nora Castaneda, who is the president of the Women's Bank, and she tours North America a bit in England, and she works very closely with Selma James and Women's Global Strike for Peace, or the Wages for Housework group. And they are very influential and very strong in Venezuela. So that's reflected in the Constitution, as is many of these things. So the Constitution, the Constituent Assembly came out of these movements, which were important in the struggles of the 90s. So I don't know whether I've answered to some extent both those things. the question of the international component and its impact on Venezuela. I mean, I don't know. You probably can answer this a bit better than I can. I was really struck, in some of the early, demonstrations against the war in Iraq a few years ago in Venezuela, as how few people were there. I mean, there seemed to be very little consciousness of international struggles outside Latin America. Maybe it was different in Latin America, but I think that has changed significantly because of the growing recognition of the struggle against imperialism. But it's less developed than I would have guessed. As far as the question of impact on Cuba, it's hard to say what the impact of the Venezuelan Revolution on Cuba is. When I go to Cuba, there are constant questions from friends, and trying to find out as much as possible. In 2003, at the Solidarity meetings in Caracas, the first of the Solidarity meetings, Carlos Laje, the vice president, gave a speech on the whole question and raised this question that some people say that there's a fear or a danger of the Cubanization of the Venezuelan Revolution. He said the more interesting question is the Venezuelanization of the Cuban Revolution. And I think that is definitely true. I think from what I can see, there's very great interest in the communal councils. Where the communal councils differ, for example, from the CDRs, the Committees for the Defense of the Revolution in Cuba, is CDRs don't have money. They can't do anything. They can organize police, etc., and defend their local areas, but they cannot join together and decide on something like, let's, put in for a budget to, get a sewer system here, kind of thing. They can't manage money. There's general suspicion of that in Cuba, that money and having access to money breeds corruption, etc., and there's a very great reluctance to allow that to happen. The problem is, on all such kinds of, perspectives, that it goes contrary to, Rosa Luxemburg's argument that the working class demands the right to make its own mistakes and learn from the process of history. When you don't allow that to happen, people don't grow. So that's, as far as the question of the communal councils, this is a process, some of the communal councils haven't been constructed yet. They expect there'll be 25,000 of these, communal councils. I think the last figure I heard was 18,000, but many of those 18,000 are still really just electing their representatives, just meeting, etc. But again, they're not dropping from the sky because there are local organizations that have been there. It's really consolidating those organizations that's happening. And how do you avoid, the question was, how difficult is it to sustain them in this context? Well, one of the interesting mechanisms that has rules in which the communal councils function is that they have to talk about projects, common projects that they want. And the sort of instruction that they've been asked to do, and I don't know whether it's actually written down or whether it's just been stated in the law, is that they should, in prioritizing things, they have to prioritize the things that they can do themselves first, rather than waiting and waiting and waiting, as is often the case in Venezuela, for money to come from the top to finance this. That they are basically said, you identify the things that you can do immediately yourself. And that's part of the process that's been happening. And I've seen interviews with people in the different communal councils, and met people in different communal councils, where they talk about how much they've saved by working together and like getting enough money that would have previously paved a certain amount of road, and now they find ways to do double the amount by simply working themselves, organizing the process. There's been a lot of, there's fascinating elements. The ultimate communal council law did not reflect all of the discussions that we're going into. There was one point where the discussion of the communal councils was that people should be in communal councils from the age of 14. That they should be, that in fact it will be the young people who will be the ones the most active in their communities. They are the ones you want to really ensure. I think it's 16 at this point, but it's still a concept of these are your local communities self-organizing. Now, they get money in two ways. One is there's a reallocation of budgets away from the mayors, which is where a lot of corruption has existed. So they are getting money. They're also getting, when they have specific projects, they also get, sort of grants from above, with great fanfare, et cetera, like that. But that's, one of, I think, a negative element.
Should we take some more?
New values.
Oh, sorry.
New values. Yeah, I think the issue is, I forgot where that came from, the issue of new values. Yeah. But the issue of new values is absolutely essential. I mean, and I think that's what the struggle has to be. But my feeling is you cannot talk about new values unless you're prepared to talk about socialism. That you have to, you can say it's not the socialism of the Soviet Union, it's not the socialism of this, it's not the socialism, but you have to be prepared to talk about socialism as the answer to capitalist values. That's
Daniela, do you want to add anything?
Well, just a little bit about the lady who asked about women's rights. I brought with me, and I can show to you, but it's in Spanish, part of the booklet that is used in the Consejos Comunales and is used in the community for teaching about the rights of women. And there is a lot of work going on about that. Machismo, there is machismo in Venezuela like there is in many Latin American countries.
Even in Canada.
Like there is here, like there is in Canada. I mean, I encounter machismo in every possible way, and I've experienced it myself throughout the years as a professional, as a woman, as a mother. It doesn't matter. But there is a lot of work going on that, but that work, like Michael said, has to come from the bottom, from the base, and then you have to change the perceptions that people have. It's a perception that you have to, for example, you go on the road and then someone actually butts in front of you with a car and then they say, oh, it had to be a woman, that kind of thing. So you really need to change those perceptions, and the way that you change that is by doing education. And there's no other way about that. They are laws that are being brought forward against abuse for women, a lot of the law about the stipend for women who stay in the home so that their work is recognized. So it's not a work that is for free. It's a work that is recognized, and there are many homemakers in Venezuela who don't make any money and who are dependent on whatever, manna coming from the sky, that kind of thing. So now they have recognition from the government that their work is actually valuable, and they're trying to integrate them into the many educative venues and programs that the government has right now, or has brought forward.
One just additional point is that it's interesting to look at the Constitution and see its gender-neutral language. And also, Chavez regularly speaks of compañeros, compañeras. Always. It's always a very consistent message there.
Suzanne, with the Venezuela Coalition, is going to pass the hat around for a collection in support of the Coalition's work. I've got a lot of hands here. I'm going to try and juggle as best I can. If everybody keeps relatively disciplined in terms of, as the last round, relatively short questions, we'll be able to get through a lot more.